Call this special meeting of the Jackson City School Board of Education to order. Roll call, Ms. Striver.
McDonald,
Yes.
Moore,
Here.
Harless,
Here.
Morris,
Here.
Smith.
Here.
All are present.
And the Pledge of Allegiance. Okay, I need a motion to approve the agenda.
So moved.
Second. Smith,
Yes.
Harless,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
McDonald.
Yes.
Motion
And
passes.
I need a motion to approve the minutes.
So moved.
Second.
Smith,
Yes.
Morris,
Yes.
Harless,
Yes.
Moore,
Yes.
McDonald.
Yes.
The motion passes.
And Mr. Howard?
Yes, if you remember, we concluded our last meeting while we were a little bit in limbo. We had just received guidance and governance from the Ohio Department of Education, giving us direction as to how our graduation should play out. But that same exact day of our board meeting, the governor came on and he gave conflicting remarks. So we kind of knew that there would be direction coming in the next couple of days. And in fact, the very next day, the governor revised what he had said the day before. Now, I have that clip of that video here. I'm more than willing to have it played, but I think most of you have seen that. If you're all right, I can not show that or show it. It's up to you. So I think all of you have seen the governor's comments. So having said that, before the day was over, after the governor gave his new remarks, ODE and the Ohio Department of Health put out new guidance. So if you bring that up. And in this guidance, it talks about, it's not a whole lot different than what ODE had put out before, but it does talk about virtual graduations being the safest and the best way to hold your high school graduation. But it gives you a couple of other options. So if you could go back to that for just a second and leave that up for our viewers. There are 3 different options that you can do to have an in-person graduation. I think a little bit of the confusion for us has been that, you know, we've said all along, and I've said, and I'll take responsibility for this, I've talked about a virtual graduation. But this is in fact not only a virtual graduation, but there's an in-person component to our graduation. And the way that this would work, myself, the superintendents from Oak Hill and Wellston met again with the county health director to iron out the plans. And if you remember, the last time we were talking about each student would be allowed to have 2 people come with them to the ceremony. We've ended up changing that to 4 people will now be allowed to come with the graduate. And what will happen is our graduates will come to the student parking lot. They will come into the building with their 4 people. We'll have some tables set up where they'll drop off Chromebooks and different things that they need to get turned in, pick up their ropes and so forth for their graduation march. We'll have a green screen set up where they'll be able to record themselves and tell what their plans are after graduation. At that point, then, the parents will go to a different set of doors. The student will start at another door. Mr. Haynes will call the student's name. They will meet. They will have the student's diploma. They will get to hand their diploma to their child, which is a totally new component, something we've never done before. And then after that, we'll have a photographer right there to capture that moment, and it'll also be videoed. We will have another position in the gym to go to for the turning of the tassel, and hopefully our tech people are going to be able to take something from that of all of the students and create some kind of a collage or something of all of the students turning their tassel. I'm not going to say that this is the only method that would work under the governor's and ODE and the Ohio Department of Health's plan. I will say that I think it's the best. I have seen some other ones that people have submitted to me, and I think that those could potentially work. But most of those, if you look at option 1, talks about drive up or a drive through. Option 2, drive up. One of them's drive up, one of them's drive through graduations. In both of those scenarios, you're dealing with potentially, if you split it in half, 90 vehicles or even 180 vehicles. And the problem, as I see it with that, as well as the health director and the other superintendents, is that you're putting, in some cases, families in vehicles that are not used to necessarily being around each other or not coming from the same family. And then, that's part of it. The other part is, quite frankly, people don't always do what they're supposed to do. And so you're in a situation where it's hard to control people. I'll give you a perfect example. Almost every year we'll have our school spelling bee, and our principal will go up to the microphone and say, our students have worked extremely hard. Please make sure to be courteous. We want to make sure that every student has a fair chance. Silence your cell phones, and if you have an infant or a toddler with you and they get a little fussy, please take them out. 10 minutes into the program, there's a baby screaming and crying, and 500 people are turning around looking at me like, are you going to do anything? And so I shouldn't have to do that, but myself or my principal have to go over and ask the person to take a child out. We end up getting cursed out, and before the night's over with, all 5 of you get a phone call that says that the superintendent was a jerk, came over and made me leave. But the reality of that is, if the superintendent or the principal didn't do that, you'd probably get 200 phone calls because your superintendent stood there and watched that happen and didn't say a word. So, unfortunately, people won't necessarily follow the rules. And I don't mean to generalize, because I know that the vast majority of the people will. But when you have a crowd of that size and a bunch of the people decide to not follow the rules, you've got problems. So for those reasons, I think that bringing our students in, Mr. Haynes has a schedule set up of 10 to 15 minutes per graduate. It's going to take us 5 days to do this, 5 days. And we will be practicing social distance. There'll be less than 10 people involved, because if we're allowing 4 students for the graduate, that's 5. You've got Mr. Haynes is 6, probably myself is 7. We've got to have a professional photographer is 8, and you've got at least 1 or 2 of our IT people. So that pretty much covers our 10 people that will be permitted to be around while this is taking place. So they'll be coming in one door, going out another. Shouldn't be mingling with anyone else. We'll have people out on duty to make sure that people get into the building and get back out to their vehicles. And I think that this is the best way to go. And I don't want to put this totally off on the health director, because I personally believe that this is absolutely the best way that we need to go. I'm glad that I have a senior in this class, because no one's going to be able to say, which has been said to me, well, you'd feel differently if you had a senior in this class. Well, I do. And of course, I'd love to see my son walk across the field at Alumni Stadium to receive his diploma, but I don't see any way that can happen this year, and for us as a board to make that decision and have it be a responsible decision. When we talk about graduation, or when we have talked about graduation at my home, the conversation would always consist of me saying, while I feel bad that you didn't get to have your prom and your graduation, we need to take a look at these things and keep things in perspective. There's people dying. Just because it's not happening here doesn't mean that it can't happen here. People have lost their jobs. Some people will never recover financially from the loss. In Ohio, nationwide, there's been over 1,000 people die in Ohio from COVID-19. Nationwide, on a bad year, 60,000 people die of the flu. We had 60,000 people die in 6 weeks from COVID-19. So when you're comparing it to the flu, and that was a statistic that was relayed today when the governor gave his address earlier today. The Ohio High School Athletic Association canceled the winter sports, canceled the tournaments right in the middle of the tournaments. We had a young man who was going to compete at the state tournament, and a lot of people believe that he may have ended up being a state champion. He lost out on that opportunity. They have since canceled spring sports, so a lot of kids, particularly those who only do one sport, they've lost the opportunity to be able to do that in their last year of school. And then if you take a look at some of the other huge events that have been canceled, and a lot of them are canceled, not necessarily postponed. The NCAA, March Madness, there's not a much bigger event than that. The Olympics, canceled. NBA basketball season, postponed. Almost all the professional sports have either been canceled or postponed. The Kentucky Derby has been canceled. So there's a lot of things that have been canceled. And so I look at my son and I say, you lost a dance and a traditional graduation. In 1917, 17 and 18-year-olds were called to the war to fight. Many of them lost their lives. In 1940s, 17 and 18-year-olds were called to World War II. And in 1969, 17 and 18-year-olds went to Vietnam to fight. In fact, a 15-year-old, his name was Dan Bullock, you can look it up, 15 years old, died in the war. You lost a prom and a traditional graduation. Those kids were called to war. You were called for 2.5 months to the couch. Now, having said that, we all want what's best for our kids, and we all want to give them a proper send-off. And again, I'm so glad, I feel bad for my son, but I'm so glad that I have a student in this particular class. But I usually say, what I have ended it with is, do I need to talk anymore about being selfish and the difference between selfish and sacrifice? Because for me, as a parent and as the leader of the district, to make a recommendation that we have anything other than what I've described here would be a selfish act on my part. So we need to keep things in perspective. You don't always get what you want in life, and sometimes there are tough lessons to learn. And that's how the conversation generally has ended. So I'm recommending to you here tonight that we follow the guidance of the Jackson County Health Director, the plan that was laid out and agreed to by myself and the other two superintendents, and that's the plan that we follow for our graduation this year at Jackson High School. And I think that, well, I know that there are some other things that are going on that we can talk about here briefly that we will do to appropriately recognize and honor this graduating class. Are there any objections to following the guidance and direction that we set out with the Jackson County Health Director?
All 3 schools are doing the same thing?
Is my understanding. Now, again, they both have separate boards of education, but that's what we all agreed upon at that time, and I believe that they're all going to follow the same format. Now, there'll be some little differences as far as the videos and those kind of things, but I think generally speaking, we're all following the same particular format.
Are we going in any kind of order, like alphabetically, so these kids maybe can have a heads up on what order we're going in as far as contact
I'm going to let Mr. Haynes, we hooked him up with a microphone there, talk about the process a little bit more.
Yeah, for the most part, they'll be going in alphabetical order. We understand that our valedictorians have their speeches to also record, so they will be allotted a little bit longer period of time, and we've kind of set them at the beginning and the end of the days, but we're going to go in alphabetical order for this. My plan is tomorrow to get this information out to students via their email, and basically a post on the website that says seniors need to check their email, and also do a school messenger call tomorrow night to get that information out as well. And it, we have in this area, we have a very large senior class, 180 students. We have allotted 10 minutes. It's going to be very point to point to point because we have things we have to do and have to capture. And we have to give our tech guys, who are amazing, but they still have to have the time to be able to compile this and put it together. So we have a very kind of scripted, and we'll be sending that information out in the email of you arrive at your time, you're going to be, our deputy will say, hey, it's time for you to come in. They will drop things off. They will pick up diploma. They'll be getting a picture in the cap and gown, a short video. Then they'll be doing their grad walk with their name read. And one of the things I think that, and it doesn't go very far to alleviate some of the things they've lost, but I think it is a special thing for this class to be able to have their parents or whoever they designate that came in with them to hand them their diploma, which is going to be unique to this graduating class. Students don't have that opportunity. And then we'll do the changing of the tassel, cap toss, and then they'll be leaving. And we're going to make sure, and I believe, I don't want to speak out of turn here, but I believe the board is going to make sure that every student with no charge is going to receive video of the whole ceremony when it's finished, as well as a picture of them being presented their diploma by their parents in their cap and gown.
Yes, we've decided that the board will make sure that every student gets a photo that we will incur the cost for, as well as a copy of the video.
So, and it will be pretty prescribed. We're going to ask parents, and this will be a tough thing, is that when they come in, we're going to be going from spot to spot, and we're going to ask that, this is not a time for parents and families to get pictures taken because we're on a time crunch. It's going to take 30 to 40 hours of collection of this, and so we don't have a lot of extra time to allot to those kind of things. So, we're going to try to do the best we can to get people through in an orderly fashion and give them time to kind of appreciate the moment. But we still have to have time to be able to collect the things we need to collect and be able to compile the videos and things and put it together. So they're going to get a kind of a hybrid of a virtual and an in-person individual ceremony with this.
Did we have many who are not able to graduate due to constrictions of grades?
Right now, we had, looking at, there may be I'm still waiting to hear back from Buckeye Hills. They had some turn-in this week. Most of ours were on track. We have recently had some people pick up the pace, and so I think that we're going to have all the ones that we had in the building be on track to graduate this year.
All of them?
The ones that we had in the building that made it
Wonderful.
to the closure are going to be on track to graduate. And I'm still waiting back to hear from Buckeye Hills because they had some students that had some materials to turn in, and their turn-in time was this week.
That's
So.
outstanding. Thank you, Mr. Haynes.
Any other questions on that piece of it before we move on? Okay, as Mr. Haynes alluded to there, we have decided that we will make sure that every student or parent gets a professional photo, and we will also make sure that every student gets a copy of the video. We've also talked about, and at our last board meeting, we talked about some signage with pictures of kids. I know that there were some schools that are lining their driveway and so forth. And after the meeting was over, Mr. Moore asked me if he could kind of head this project up. So I basically handed it off to him. These are the pictures that you're looking at now. We talked about prices last time. That bottom one is much bigger. The top ones are your basic yard signs or signs that you would see that are up for when people were up for election. The bottom one is considerably bigger. Brian, do you know the size of that?
2 by 3.
Okay, yeah, 2 foot by 3 foot. I think the others are, 18 inches by 24 inches.
Yeah.
Yeah, so they're considerably bigger, and I'm going to let you talk about, I think you've got that project started, and that's
Yep.
something that will be,
Yeah, we have, all 180 kids will have their pictures and name on a signs, individual signs. And then we're gonna place them up at the school. We've had some, businesses and individuals give us some money, and, we're gonna do that. I think that we won't have them all till about the 16th. So we should have them up there for a week or so. And then we will allow the kids to take their individual sign home with them, so.
Thank you.
Yes, thank
That's
you.
wonderful, Brian.
Yep, thank you.
We also have a project that I don't want to talk too much about because I want it to be a surprise for our seniors, but our valedictorians, there's a surprise coming for them later this week, and I think you'll be able to see it hopefully by the end of the week to recognize their accomplishments. Because those students, they are missing out on the opportunity to stand in front of 3,000 people or whatever and give their valedictorian speech. So hopefully this will be one way that we can help to recognize them a little more than what valedictorians have normally gotten in the past. So, does anyone have anything else?
There was another idea that came up that we were talking about, and it was about having a plaque, maybe making a plaque. I know Dr. Morris talked about it, and somebody had, I guess, brought something up, and if you want to talk about that.
Yeah, we just, you get ideas all the time, people passing. I thought that this was a really good one. If we could do some sort of plaque somewhere in the building commemorating the class of 2020 for, things that they have missed out on, so people can always kind of remember that.
I think that's doable.
Do you
Certainly.
have the funding for that right now?
Haven't, just got the idea today.
I will help with
Yeah,
that.
I'm sure we can come up with it, though.
I will help
I don't think
with
that's going to
that.
be an issue. I appreciate that, Alice.
Anything else? I think we're ready to adjourn if there's nothing else.
Okay, nobody has any closing items?
I do, this will air on the 22nd, correct? The date
Yes.
that we would have originally graduated.
22nd at 8 p.m., Mr. Haynes?
Yeah, what we're gonna try to do that day is try to make it as much like that Friday would be. We plan to, and we'll put out a full schedule later on, and, one of the things that they'll pick up when they pick up their diploma is their graduation, pamphlet, and it'll have that information in it. But we're looking at airing the senior film that morning, probably around 9 o'clock. And then we usually do kind of the pregame kind of things with the graduation where we air pictures of the graduates, the senior film, and the where are we going, little segments are going to get videoed. We kind of air that in that hour leading up to graduation. So graduation itself will be available at 8 o'clock on May 22nd, just like it would be. So we're going to try to preserve as many of those little touchstones along the way as we can.
We've always kind of had that, you haven't seen it because we usually walk into the stadium 5 minutes before the graduation, but we've tried to have that so that people arriving, an hour early for graduation would have some type of entertainment, something to watch. So we'll try to make that part as much like the way it has been in the past. So the actual graduation video will start at 8 o'clock, but there will be some things prior to that.
Do you have any other items or closing comments by board members?
I'd like to recognize this as National Teacher Week. And I'd like to thank you folks for working so hard to get this together. I appreciate your efforts.
Thank you.
Not? Need a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Second.
Meeting adjourned.